Welcome to another edition of the Invisible Wheelchair Interview Podcast. I'm Donald Grodoff, family coach with FamilyOCD.com, FocusedHealthyFamily.com, and of course, InvisibleWheelchair.com. In the Invisible Wheelchair interviews, I get the wonderful chance to interview some of the experts with obsessive-compulsive disorders, professionals that treat OCD, people who are going through or have been through OCD, parents and caregivers of those suffering from OCD, and of course anyone that advocates for treatment of OCD. My goal of these interviews is to inform people on all aspects of OCD and bring about awareness of obsessive-compulsive disorder. Please remember that I am not a doctor, therapist, or counselor, and the content, information, resources, and ideas that are talked about and brought up here in these interviews are not necessarily the views and opinions of myself, Family OCD, Focused Healthy Family, and Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, and I always recommend to seek additional professional help in finding solutions for yourself. You can find out more about me at FamilyOCD.com, FocusedHealthyFamily.com, and InvisibleWheelchair.com. This podcast interview was recorded June 30th, 2017. I am so excited again to have one of my favorite people on, a person I admire so much. Her name is Susan Phariss, and Susan is a neurodevelopment specialist, mechanical engineer, author, speaker, and brain development expert. After getting her own life back after 10 years of crippling anxiety, Susan performed a controlled study in a public school, helping kids overcome behavior and learning challenges. She helped her first client overcome mild OCD symptoms in 2009 and went on to help many more kids overcome serious behavior problems. Susan is passionate about helping bright kids eliminate the blocks that prevent them from reaching their full, thriving, happy potential. You can learn more about Susan at www.brainfitnessstrategies.com. Now let's get to the interview. So Susan, I am so glad that you've joined me today, and I want to welcome you to the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast.
I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you, Don. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, I'd like to start out, Susan, by asking you if you would mind telling your story of how you got into what you're doing and why you got into what you're doing.
We got into this brain business because my husband had a severe head injury as a child and was unable to read as an adult. We wrote a book about how juggling changes the brain and was part of the solution for helping him read. And while we were researching that book, we came across this method and became clients first because at that point there were 3 people in North America who practiced it. So we went and saw one of them. And then our results were so profound that we were compelled to become practitioners. My husband completely overcame dyslexia, and for me, it was a different story. I had lost my first husband very traumatically after a 20-year marriage, and my life completely fell apart. I became quite incapacitated. I could no longer file things. I couldn't go shopping. I could hardly leave the house. I had panic attacks, anxiety, health issues. I just lost so many skills and had to leave the nonprofit that I was managing at the time because I didn't want it to go down with me. It was very bad depression and my life was just a mess. At first we chalked it up to grief, and then 2 years go by, 5 years go by, 10 years go by, and I'm still a wreck. And then we set up appointments for my husband knowing that it was supposed to help him with his dyslexia, but we had no idea that it was going to completely turn my life around. And when we found how powerful it was and how impactful and how much it could completely turn your life around. We became practitioners, did a study in a public school. Then we've been practicing for, 8 years since then. We just continue to see what, in my eyes, they're miracles. I know that that's saying a lot, but I see miracles in all of life. So this for me has been a miracle in my life, and I've seen it be a miracle in our clients' lives, and I just can't get enough of it. I just love doing it. I'm passionately committed to helping other people dramatically turn their lives around.
That's wonderful, Susan. Thank you for that story. It's a beautiful story, and I know you to know that you do some great work. Next thing I'd like to do is if you could define what a neurodevelopmental specialist is and what you do.
Well, if we look at just the word itself, neurodevelopment, it is brain growth. What we do is we use movement. We use the original operating system. The brain originally develops through babies' movement. So we go and we use the same movements that babies make in the first year of life, and we can trigger brain growth in very specific parts of the brain. We often find that someone has skipped a developmental milestone and it causes all kinds of problems in either their academic skills or their behavior, whether they're a child or an adult. And we can go in, do these exact same movements that a baby makes, and the brain recognizes the movements. It starts building these new neural pathways that connect up the brain where it's supposed to be. We're just filling in the missing blanks. Then everything just gets easy. That's pretty much what we do, is we make life easier by filling in the missing areas of the brain.
That brings up for me another thought, and one of the reasons I really even wanted you on today is you talk about, I believe, the primal reflexes. Is that correct?
Yes, primitive reflexes. That's from my perspective, it's the original operating system. From the fetus, from the actual formation of the original cells, all the way up to age 3, all babies make the same movements. All the babies move in the womb. They come out. They know how to be born. They know how to nurse. They grab everything. All these babies do the same thing. Those are all primitive reflexes. You put your finger in a baby's hand, it will grab it. That is a primitive reflex. Well, this primitive reflex system, I kind of compare it, the best comparison is like a software. There's all these different steps, and each one builds on the one before it. The whole purpose of this system is to build the nervous system from scratch so that we grow a healthy, strong brain. When you're born, you've got the gray matter, but there's almost no white matter, and the white matter is the wiring that connects the different parts of the brain to each other. For example, car insurance companies know at age 26, people become safer drivers. Well, that is when the brain is finished growing the area that connects the emotional, impulsive part of the brain to the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive decision-making part of the brain. These things are, these primitive reflexes, they work up until age 3, and then they should turn off, and your adult reflexes should take over. And so that around 3 is when you see a toddler, when they walk and they rock from side to side, then all of a sudden they walk in a straight manner, and their arms swing at their sides, and they look really coordinated. That's that point where we switch from the primitive reflexes to the adult reflexes. Our practice is built on using those primitive reflexes to go ahead and finish the brain's development and get them turned off. Because if they're both running at the same time, if the primitive reflexes are running at the same time as the adult reflexes, you've got 2 operating systems running at the same time. Neither one of them is going to work right. That's why you have people with road rage or just all these different behavioral problems. That's usually from these primitive reflexes still being turned on and sabotaging you, basically. So we need to finish them and then turn them off.
That's a really interesting point you bring up, because some people, those things don't get turned up. Why would they not get turned off properly as they should, or turned on as they should?
There's a variety of reasons. There can be simple things like on the day that a child was supposed to finish off a reflex, and all of this is done through movement, so that's a very important thing to keep in mind. That's why babies need to move. If they were supposed to be finishing off a reflex on a day when maybe you were flying cross country and they were stuck in a car seat or a baby carrier all day and they didn't get to move and they didn't get to finish it off, now you've got a reflex that's stuck on. Or they can maybe have an ear infection on the day that they're supposed to finish a reflex. If they're just sick from some regular normal baby problem, it can prevent that reflex from finishing. But what we're running into more now is these reflexes can be re-triggered or never allowed to finish because of EMFs, electromagnetic frequencies, which is cell phones and Wi-Fi. That's a big problem. Glutens keep these reflexes triggered, which is why we have all of our clients go off of glutens, and now mostly we're having them go completely off of grains because of what else we've learned about lectins that are in grains that cause a great deal of inflammation in the brain. A divorce in the family can re-trigger the reflexes to come up. Loss of a dear family member, a car accident, any type of trauma, whether mercury poisoning, oh my goodness, that's a huge one. So I will bravely say right here, I am not a big fan of vaccinations because of the amount of metals that are pumped into the system, and then you've got to get them out again later if you're going to be healthy. But the mercury can definitely cause huge problems and cause autism and problems like that. And I know that that's not a popular opinion, but it's mine and I'm sticking with it.
Good for you. And so then again, to take it one step further, if those reflexes are turned off, not properly turned off, or triggered back on, that's where you can find sensory issues. A lot, this extra sensitive to light, sound, touch, all that. Would that be true?
Absolutely. That's one of the things that we're fastest at helping kids overcome is sensory processing disorder. When babies are born, they've got this reflex called the Moro reflex. You've seen it when you put a baby down maybe just a little bit too fast and they were asleep and then all of a sudden they fling their arms out and scream. That's the Moro reflex. And its job is to calibrate your senses. It's supposed to, when the baby's born, all the volume is turned all the way up and tactile, the touch is turned all the way up and light is turned all the way up. And this Moro reflex, if everything goes right, which it rarely does anymore, then this Moro reflex is going to calibrate those senses down to a tolerable level. We've got all these kids out there that are just super sound sensitive and light sensitive, and you've got to cut the tags out of their clothing, and they cannot wear socks. That's a major nightmare for kids with sensory processing disorder. They also have motion sickness. There's a lot of difference. All the senses are involved, smell, taste. So kids that are super picky eaters, this is part of the problem there. But very quickly, we can dial that in by doing these very specific movements for the Moro reflex, and we have to do them very carefully because they can really overstimulate kids. So it takes a great deal of skill to do this without overstimulating them, to get them better and only better, not worse in the way. That's absolutely something that these reflexes cause and can resolve quickly.
I'd like to talk a little bit of the experiences that you've had dealing with OCD, if you've had some experiences related to that and how the work you do can help to overcome that.
Absolutely. I think I've worked, off the top of my head, I can think of 3 clients we've worked with that had OCD. I would not say they were severe cases. I've spoken to people with severe cases, but I would consider these mild. So the first one was our very first paid client. It was an adorable little boy who was adopted. He had a lot of issues. For example, he could only wear one set of clothes. He could not wear another set of clothes. while we were seeing him, he joined the Cub Scouts. It was kind of a big deal that he couldn't wear his little uniform because he, and I mean, all winter long he had to wear shorts because he could only wear this one outfit. His mom told us about that, and we did some of the exercises on him, and the very next week he was able to wear his Cub Scout uniform. So we considered that a huge improvement. And, we were beginners at the time, so it was very, very exciting. And then we had an adult several years later who she lived in Washington, D.C., and she ran a business that wrote grant proposals for federal grants. It was a very heavy-duty job, so she had an agency and had several employees. She went through some trauma, and the reflexes turned on, and her life was destroyed. And when we met her, she'd had to move back in with her mother in another state. She was OCD, and at that point she was also being treated for bipolar. She was unable to work at all. She was unable to pick up, the house had become something that you would see on television for hoarding. We started working with her. It really wasn't very long with her. I'm going to say maybe 4 months. She was able to go back to work. She was able to move out of the home with her mother, have a normal life, was able to go back to work full-time with the job that she loved. It's just everything completely turned around. So we've seen that. And then another little girl who was mild OCD, and the big thing with her was the picky eater, that she would only eat 2 foods. She was 8 years old. She was extremely underweight, very, very bright, and major problem at school, major problem at home. We started working with her, and in the first 2 weeks she asked to start tasting new foods, like two new foods a week, which was a huge step in the right direction. She was so funny, and this is part of that Moro reflex too, with smell, that she had complained endlessly whenever her mother would cook her favorite little dish, which was, I think, like zucchini in butter and garlic. And her daughter would always just, "Oh, that stinks. How can you eat that? It's horrible. I can't take it." She was a very dramatic little girl. She was a lot of fun. And then she goes running into the kitchen one day, and I'm going to say this was maybe a couple of months in, and she says, "What is that smell? It smells wonderful." And then she sees what her mom's cooking, and she stopped. And that day she couldn't try it, but the next day she had to try it. So we've seen her go from, you couldn't brush her hair. Her hair, her mom had given up even trying to brush her hair. It was just one giant mat. She wanted to be touched. She wanted to be cuddled. She wanted her mom to brush her hair. She was trying all these new foods. It was exciting time. So we've seen some dramatic turnarounds with these kids.
I know those hopeful times, like you talk about, those really exciting times when they take that step, because my daughter used to do that. She would have a breakthrough moment, and it was like jumping for joy and singing and dancing and just, so I would understand that fully. Would you maybe go through just a typical maybe session of examples of maybe an exercise or two that you do and how you operate, I guess, is where I would ask?
Okay. So the first session, we do an assessment. And let me just say right here that we're able to do all of this over Skype. So we work with clients all over the world because I need to just see things. I don't have to touch them. So we would have, for example, if we were working with your daughter, we would have you and her on Skype, and we would have you get her to get in certain positions. So we'd have her get on her hands and knees, and we'd have her lay on her back, and we'd have you maybe stroke her cheek, or just do different things, and maybe have you looking at the irises of her eyes while we do something, and tell me, do her eyes dilate or do they contract? Things like that, and we're able to see which reflexes are active and which ones are causing the biggest problems. Before this session, we've had the parent fill out a questionnaire that says what all problems are there, and we've had them, my favorite step is having them set goals. So they write down what are the biggest challenges now, and what would they like to have? How could this change their lives if their child didn't have this problem, if their child didn't have to wash their hands 5 times every time they went out the door? What would be different? How would their lives be different? And then we also get the kids to buy in. So we ask them, I tell them I'm their brain's fairy godmother, and they get 3 wishes, and it's got to be 3 wishes I can actually deliver. So it might be, I don't have to wash my hands all the time, or I can spend the night at a friend's house because I don't wet the bed, or I get along better with my younger brother. So anything like that, that's something I can actually deliver, that goes on their list, and we go back and we check it frequently. So at the end of the assessment, I've got a pretty good idea of what our highest priorities are and where to start. And here's where we're really different. We show the child a chart of the movements that they get to choose from, and we let them pick. And what I've found over these 8 years, we experiment a lot. My background is in engineering, so I'm very motivated to make progress every single session. So I keep tremendous amounts of data. And we found over the years that our fastest path to success and results and relief is having the kids pick their own movements, because they're drawn to the ones that they really need. So they'll pick a movement out off of the chart, and then I will physically show them how I do it, and then they do it at home. And frequently they can't do it, because that's the whole problem, is that they don't have this reflex development. They don't have the coordination to do this very simple movement that any infant can make. They skipped that, or there's a problem with it, so it doesn't quite work right at this point. So we figure out how they can do it successfully, and at the end of the session they've got a few movements to do for their homework, and they'll do those movements a few days a week. And I mean, a worst case scenario, which at this point it never happens, they would have to do their exercises 7 days a week for 20 minutes. Typically, it's more like 3 to 5 days a week. That is totally dependent on each individual and what their individual case is. At the end of the first session, you've had an assessment, you've got your goals all set, and you've got your first set of exercises. And then we meet again, however long we're working with that person. We may meet once a week, once every 2 weeks. They do their exercises, and then every session we'll start off with what has changed, what's different, what are you noticing? And the parent might say, well, everything seems to be about the same. And then we'll say, well, are they still having you wash the plate in between courses? No, you know what? I don't have to do that anymore. I guess that is better. Or they're not stuttering anymore, or they were able to play with a friend, or that just all these different things happen, and they're subtle. And so we've got to watch for them, because we want the child to be very aware that what they're doing is changing things and that they're getting better.
At this point, what I'd like to be able to do is tell us how they can best get a hold of you, if you give your basic information like website information and all that, if you would.
Sure. The website it's a long one, brainfitnessstrategies.com. And you can email me directly at susan@brainfitnessstrategies.com, or you could call me at 918-629-2689. My phone number looks like I'm in Oklahoma, but I'm actually in Austin, Texas. So we see clients here in Austin, Texas, and we see clients all over the world through Skype, the beautiful magic of Skype.
And I will have that information up on the invisiblewheelchair.com website for everybody to find. And Susan, I have to say, I admire you so much in what you do. I appreciate so much you being part of this today and talking with us.
It's been my pleasure, Dawn. It seems like we've hardly touched on anything, but hopefully we've gotten enough information to people that they know that there's something else to look into, that there are solutions. This is an absolute, this works. What we're finding is that there can still be underlying issues like mercury poisoning, things like that, that continue to cause problems, but the exercises will continue to give total relief while you address the other underlying issues.
Well, I know that you, just like myself, you look at the whole environment of what's going on for that child and not just that one little piece of the reflexes, but look at everything that could be, involved with that. So you do a holistic approach to that person, that child, and that's wonderful. So again, I thank you. And yeah, there's so much to this. We could probably talk for days on this because there's just so much. I think we both have that passion to want to know what the brain does and how to change it and how to work with it and help improve people's lives, and that's what you do, and I think that's wonderful. So again, thank you. That is it for today, and I'll look forward to the next time we talk. Take care.
Thanks, Don.
This concludes this podcast. Please remember to leave comments for me because that really helps me to understand what you're looking for and helps give me fodder for the next possible podcast. Also, I'd love to hear your invisible wheelchair story if you're willing to share it. If you are, feel free to go to invisiblewheelchair.com and click on Tell Your Story. Now, if you've heard these things and you feel like you need further assistance or some help in what you're going through, and you want to spend some time with me working through those issues, then feel free to book a session at focusedhealthyfamily.com or familyocd.com, or simply call me at 704-562-1630. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast and will join me for the next one. Remember, keep tapping, talking, and transcending your life into new heights. Thank you, and have a great day.